Leave the gun. Take the lightsaber. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Margaret, or Margaret Corleone Blues. Of course, named after the two loves of my life, Michael Corleone and Jake Blues. And this is kind of going to be my late May the 4th video. Today we are going to be talking about George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola and their friendship, and how The Godfather and Star Wars basically probably would not have existed if it was not for their friendships with each other. Luke and Michael, we're your daddies. Now let's start when they met. Francis Ford Coppola had graduated from UCLA Film School. He was directing the movie Finian's Rainbow, and George Lucas was hired to be an assistant on the film, and that's how they met and became friends. Francis pushed George Lucas to direct his own movie, which ended up being the colossal box office failure THX 1138. That was produced by Francis Ford Coppola's production company Zoetrope, and it was financed by Warner Brothers. So it was such a big failure, they were in like this massive amount of debt to Warner Brothers, which was like, Francis was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do about that. So not too long after that, Paramount came knocking on Francis' door, and they were like, hey, we want you to direct The Godfather. Paramount was really specific about wanting an Italian director to be able to direct The Godfather. They had previously made another gangster movie, and there was not an Italian director, and there was no Italian actors in that, so they wanted to change it, and they wanted to be able to have somebody who would be able to pour their own Italian heritage into the movie. And they had their eye on Francis. Originally, they wanted Sergio Leone of the Dollars trilogy fame to direct the movie, but he had already started working on Once Upon a Time in America, which did not come out for another like 13 years. And John Belushi almost was in that movie. He would have probably been in that movie. So they went with young Italian American director Francis Ford Coppola. They wanted him to direct. He did not. He thought he was a little arrogant, and he was like, this is just some box office cash grab thing, and I'm above this. This is just like some commercial thing. He was like, I'm above that. He was also worried about like the stereotypes for Italian Americans, and it was going to portray them in a negative way. So he was not really interested at first, but George Lucas was the one that convinced him to direct The Godfather. He was like, yo, Francis, this is how we pay off the debt to Warner Brothers, is if you direct this movie, we're going to have the money to pay off the debt. So George Lucas convinced Francis Ford Coppola to direct The Godfather, and that's history. And honestly, I mean, The Godfather would have happened with or without Francis directing, but The Godfather as we know it would, in my personal opinion, would not have happened if it was not for Francis Ford Coppola. When Mario Puzo was writing the book, he already had a deal with Paramount to make a movie, and they wanted to make like a modern, because The Godfather is a period movie, but they wanted to make it modern day, so like 70s, and take place in Kansas City, and they were gonna like film on the backlots of Paramount, and it probably just would not have been very good. And Francis was the one who was really insistent, like, no, this has to be a period movie. And he was also the one who really pushed to kind of more so bring out, because a lot of people just see The Godfather as just like a gangster movie, but I think truly at its heart it's kind of the story of immigrants and the American dream and the things that they had to do to survive in America, because a lot of Americans were really xenophobic. Like, hey, Adams, hot take. Francis was the one who was really like, okay, let's make this like an allegory for capitalism and the American dream. Also, if he had not been in charge, Al Pacino and Marlon Brando would not have been in the movie, and probably not Talia Shire or like most of the cast, but especially Al and Marlon. Like, The Godfather would probably have been not the movie it was if it was not for Francis so expertly just knowing exactly what to do with this work, and Mario Puzo's combined minds making this amazing screenplay. The Godfather is the best book to movie adaptation in my opinion. I can make a whole video, but The Godfather I feel would be a completely different movie if Francis Ford Coppola had not pushed for his vision. So Francis is directing, and little known fact, this I only found this out like last year, even though I've been a Godfather fan for like over a decade. George Lucas was an editor on The Godfather. He was an assistant editor, particularly the scene after Michael kills Solozzo and Mikulski, and there's the montage of Carmine Coppola playing the piano and all the newspaper stories. George Lucas filmed that newspaper segment, and he edited that scene. One of the best scenes in The Godfather, like every scene's the best scene in The Godfather. The hospital scene. That scene when Michael is half in the door, half out of the door. And yeah, that scene's hugely important. That's a scene where it's kind of like, this is a point of no going back for Michael. They finished filming that scene, and Francis was like, wait, we don't have any empty hallway scenes. We forgot to film that. And George Lucas was like, hey, Francis, why don't you take the ending snippets of the scenes after you'd filmed the actors and take those empty moments before the camera turned off and then splice them together and make that scene. So that's what they did, and it turned out amazing, and that was George Lucas's really big contribution to The Godfather. And George's wife at the time, Marsha Lucas, who edited all the OG Star Wars movies, she actually edited all the screen tests, and she was like all about casting Al Pacino. And she said, cast Al Pacino because he undresses you with his eyes. And I have to agree with you, Marsha. So Marsha was the first Michael Corleone simp, but I'm the biggest. So around the time The Godfather was being made, Francis said to George, he was like, hey, why don't you try to direct a comedy movie? So then he ended up directing American Graffiti, and that was a huge box office success. It was a huge movie. It's a great movie. Harrison Ford's in it, like briefly. And because of the popularity of American Graffiti, it gave him the opportunity to direct and write a little known sci-fi movie called Star Wars. Thank you, Francis Ford Coppola, for encouraging George Lucas to direct a comedy, because then he was able to do Star Wars. So when George Lucas was writing Star Wars, he decided to base a character off of Francis, and this is something else I only found out recently, and my mind was blown. Han Solo, yes, that Han Solo is based on Francis Ford Coppola. I saw that and I was like, what? And then I'm like, wait, that actually kind of makes sense. Francis is like so like sarcastic and blunt and kind of grumpy, and I'm like, wait, he is Han. That makes so much sense. Inspired by Francis Ford Coppola making Apocalypse Now, and that was just like one of the most horrific times of Francis's life, and he got through it. He was had some unalivey ideas, because like making that movie almost gave him like a mental breakdown, and George Lucas admired how he got through it, and the movie didn't even come out till like 2 years after Star Wars, even though it was filmed before Star Wars. But yeah, Han Solo always, kind of getting in these situations, like, and then being brave and getting out of them. That was also kind of like the inspiration from Francis, because he was in this major debt, and then he ended up directing like the greatest movie of all time. So it's kind of really weird to watch The Godfather and be like, not The Godfather, watch Star Wars and be like, oh, that's Francis. Hey, Francis, how you doing? And Francis in Harrison Ford's body, yay. And another thing with The Godfather and Star Wars is that Al Pacino was the first name for Han Solo, and he got the script and he read it and he did not understand it. And look, I love Al Pacino more than anybody except John Belushi, but I love them equally, just about. Maybe I love John a little more, don't tell Al. But Al Pacino, my brain cannot compute Al Pacino as Han Solo. Like, Han and Harrison Ford are like interchangeable. I feel like I know Mark Hamill said this. There's like no line where Han ends and Harrison Ford begins. So I love Al so much. He is amazing in everything, but just him as Han Solo, I can't see it. Sorry, Al. He didn't understand it anyway. I feel like he would have had a terrible time on set. And he's also shorter than Mark Hamill, so like he would have been like really tiny compared to Chewie. Can you imagine that? He'd be like 2 feet shorter than Chewie. At least Harrison's tall. No offense. I love Al. I love Hal. We have a good height difference. It's okay. I like short men. he would be really short for a stormtrooper. Forget Mark. Hal was the one who's really short for a stormtrooper. And there's some inspirations in The Godfather and Star Wars. The scene where Leia chokes out Jabba was inspired by the scene where Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes. Also Carlo. I feel like Carlo could be compared to Jabba too, personality-wise. And just in general, kind of Anakin and Michael's stories always kind of remind me of each other. They're just such modern-day examples of a tragedy. And another interesting tidbit is that Sofia Coppola actually is one of Padme's handmaidens in Phantom Menace. It's the scene where Sabe is Queen Amidala. She's wearing that kind of like black feather headdress, and the handmaidens are in like that orange and yellow outfit, and I always wanted one of those when I was little. I don't know why I wanted one of those capes. Sofia Coppola is in that scene because her and Francis came to visit George Lucas on set, because, you know, they're besties, and he was like, hey, Sophia, let's put you in a robe and you could be a handmaiden, and she plays Sashay. And I feel like I'm gonna have a Star Wars fan comment on here and be like, oh, Sashay has this really complicated backstory that's in some comic book, and yeah, and Jabba the Hutt also has a cousin named Marlo the Hutt, and he looks like Marlon Brando as Vito Corleone, so that's pretty cool. I wish I looked like Marlon Brando as Vito Corleone. I wish I was Marlon Brando. Actually, I don't. I think James Caan was also considered to be Han, but the moral of the story is that if George Lucas had not put Francis Ford Coppola millions in debt, he would probably not have directed The Godfather. And if George Lucas hadn't directed a comedy at Francis Ford Coppola's suggestion, then he probably might not have made Star Wars. So if it wasn't for George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola and their friendship, The Godfather and Star Wars, my 2 very favorite movies ever, besides Blues Brothers, that they're like a trifecta, would not exist. And I think that's super cool. And George Lucas also, I feel like there's like this whole like Coppola multiverse, and I feel like I need to explore this in multiple videos. There's also stuff with the Blues Brothers in Star Wars and Blues Brothers in The Godfather, and Jim Morrison. I'm gonna probably be doing a video about Jim Morrison and Francis Ford Coppola and using his music in Apocalypse Now. So look for that eventually. And there's just all the Coppolas. There's so many Coppolas. There's a million. I've met a Coppola. I've actually met a Coppola. I've met Talia Shire's son, Robert Schwarzman. He's a band called Rooney, and they're awesome, and I really like them. So you should look them up. But there's a whole Coppola multiverse of madness. They're just everywhere. They're multiplying. Jason Schwartzman's like in the new Hunger Games movie. Talia Shire was in a movie with John Belushi. Francis Ford Coppola used to bartend at John and Tan's Blues Bar. Yeah, the Coppolas they're the ones in control. They're just make Francis Ford Coppola present. My friend is actually an extra in the Megalopolis or whatever that's called, that's coming out. So I'm actually really excited to see that. All right, that is it for today. I hope you liked today's video. I hope you learned a lot about George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola and The Godfather and Star Wars and how they all connect into the big Coppola multiverse of madness. And thank you, George Lucas, for telling Francis to get off his booty and make The Godfather, because he made it perfection, along with Mario Puzo helped too, because they wrote it together. Thank you, Francis. Your vision of The Godfather, just love you, Francis. Love you, Francis. And thank you for casting Al. Thank you, Francis. Everybody say thank you, Francis. And I hope you will like and comment and subscribe and let me know what else you would like to see on this channel. And I hope you have a great day. And of course, little Jake and I say bye.